There is a phase in life where your income is technically stable. You are not struggling in obvious ways, and nothing looks broken from the outside. But internally, something still feels uncertain and fragile. Money arrives on schedule, just like it should. Bills follow immediately, predictable and consistent every single month. And what remains afterward never quite matches the effort you put in. This situation is more common than people admit. It is not a result of failure or lack of intelligence. Yet the pressure quietly builds, making everything feel tighter over time. Even when your income increases, the relief is often temporary. Expenses expand quietly, adjusting to your new level without warning. Over time, the gap between effort and stability still remains. This is where most advice starts to fall apart, because the issue is not just about earning more or spending less. At the margin, we look at the system behind the feeling and why the pattern keeps repeating. Most people assume the problem is income. They think a higher salary will reduce risk and make life smoother over time. But the underlying volatility of expenses often grows just as fast. What you feel is not just a lack of money. It is a lack of margin in your daily decisions. There is no space for error within your current time horizon. Every decision starts to feel heavier than it should, not because the numbers are large, but because the downside risk feels immediate. A small mistake now creates a visible drawdown. You begin tracking everything more closely, not to optimize long-term growth, but to avoid short-term loss. Your focus shifts from compounding to survival. When life operates like this, decisions are no longer neutral. Each choice carries pressure tied to immediate outcomes. It stops feeling like freedom and starts feeling like constraint. This is why the fatigue feels constant. Even without major losses, your system is always active. You are managing risk every single day. In this mode, your resources are not the only thing shrinking. Your thinking bandwidth also becomes limited. Long-term planning gets replaced by short-term reactions. This is not about discipline or motivation. It is about where you are positioned in the system, and how that position defines your available margin. When you don't have space, your life becomes reactive. Every problem feels urgent, even when it isn't. You stop planning and start responding. You don't choose the best job available. You choose the one that feels safest right now. Stability becomes more important than potential. You don't leave bad situations easily. Not because you lack courage, but because you lack margin. Without backup, even small risks feel like major drawdowns. Every risk starts to feel expensive. Every change feels like volatility you cannot absorb. So you wait even when waiting costs time. This is rarely discussed clearly. Without space, your options quietly disappear. You are not choosing less, you simply have less to choose from. And without real options, life feels forced. Decisions are no longer strategic, just necessary. It becomes survival, not direction. Ironically, trying to stay safe can increase long-term risk. You avoid short-term volatility but lose long-term compounding. The system quietly keeps you in place. Because safety without space is not stability. It is pressure that doesn't go away. A stable pressure that slowly limits your time horizon. Most people try to escape by increasing income. They take on more work and extend their time horizon. It feels like the logical way to reduce financial risk. At first, it works. There is a brief reduction in pressure and volatility. For a moment, life feels slightly more stable. But the system adjusts quickly. Expenses expand and expectations shift upward. Lifestyle inflation quietly increases your baseline. Without noticing, you return to the same position. The numbers are larger, but the gap is unchanged. The drawdown feels identical, just scaled up. This is the trap most people miss. It is not about failure or lack of effort. The structure itself creates this loop. Increasing income does not automatically create space. If costs scale at the same rate, nothing fundamentally changes. The compounding effect works against you here. So the problem is not having more. The real issue is the absence of distance between earning and spending. There is no buffer to absorb shocks. And without a buffer, nothing really changes. Every gain is offset before it compounds. You stay in motion but never move forward long term. There is a moment when something begins to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to notice. It feels small, but it changes how you experience everything. You are not suddenly wealthy or financially free. Your income might look the same on paper, but the pressure no longer feels constant. There is now a small gap between events and reactions. A bit more time to think before responding. That time quietly becomes control. The difference is not in the total amount of money. It is in the margin that money creates. A small buffer changes how risk feels. For the first time, you are not reacting to everything instantly. You can choose what deserves your attention. That choice shifts your time horizon. Risk does not disappear, and volatility still exists. Problems still show up without warning, but they no longer feel like immediate threats. The key difference is distance from the problem. That distance reduces emotional drawdown, and it gives you room to think long-term. This is the point where everything starts to feel different. Not easier, but more manageable. And that changes how you move forward. Your life didn't change first. The shift happened in how you see it. And that small shift quietly changed everything around you. Before, your focus was survival. Every decision was about making it to the end of the month. Now your thinking stretches slightly beyond that timeline. Earlier, everything felt like a threat. Bills, emails, even small problems carried weight. Now, a few of those same things start to look like opportunities. You used to avoid risk completely. Stability felt safer than anything uncertain. Now you can choose which risks are worth taking. This is the part most people miss. Small control creates bigger change over time, not the other way around. When you are not under pressure, your thinking changes. You can actually process decisions instead of reacting. And that improves how you act over time. It's not about becoming smarter overnight. Your ability didn't suddenly increase. You just stopped operating in panic mode. And that shift is enough. It changes how you respond to risk, time horizon, and uncertainty. Over time, it quietly changes your direction. The problem is, most people never reach this point, not because they lack ability or intelligence, but because something else quietly resets their progress. Every time they create a little financial space, it gets filled again. Not by emergencies, but by new habits. Small upgrades that feel harmless at first. A slightly better phone, a more comfortable lifestyle. A quiet sense of reward begins to grow. It feels earned, and maybe it is, but over time, that space quietly disappears again. Not suddenly, but gradually, until it feels just as tight as before. This is not a personal failure. It is a default human response to reduce stress. We naturally optimize for short-term relief over long-term stability. But the system is built around that behavior. As income grows, expectations rise alongside it. Lifestyle inflation quietly tracks every increase. So you keep moving forward, but not outward. Progress exists, but freedom does not expand. The distance to stability barely changes. It is not about working harder. It is about protecting the space you create. Because without that, compounding never has time to work. This is where a simple concept starts to matter. It is not about how much you earn over time. It is about how much actually remains after everything. Margin is not a big number. It is the distance between you and constant pressure. A small gap that changes how risk feels. The larger that distance becomes, the clearer your thinking gets. Decisions feel less urgent and less reactive. Time horizon starts to expand naturally. That shift creates a quiet chain reaction. Better decisions begin to compound over time, and small improvements reduce long-term volatility. This is not a fast path to wealth. It is a foundation that reduces drawdown risk over time. And most people are never taught to build it. Because the system does not reward having space. It rewards constant movement and constant consumption. Margin quietly works against that rhythm. When you finally have margin, something changes. You are no longer forced to react to every situation. You begin to choose instead of chase, and that is where control slowly returns. Not instantly, but steadily over time. Margin gives you back ownership of your decisions. You don't need a perfect life to feel stable. You don't need big numbers to reduce risk. What you need is space between pressure and your decisions. Space gives you time to think before reacting. It gives you room to make mistakes without immediate drawdown. And it lets you choose instead of just survive. Without space, every decision feels urgent and compressed. No matter how high your income grows, volatility takes it away, and the pressure never really leaves. But when you create even a small margin, everything starts to shift. Your time horizon extends and decisions feel less reactive. Even a small gap can compound into control. If you're starting to see this, you're already ahead. Most people never question the system behind their stress. And in the margin, we keep breaking it down step by step.